Chapter 20. Day 2, 2000 hours. Cameron opened his eyes and grunted as his head bounced against the floor beneath him. He could feel his body moving slowly, his head still thumping along as he was being dragged by someone. "Hey!" Cameron shouted. "Stop!" He shouted at the figure that dragged him through the darkness. He couldn't make out who it was or whether he knew him or not, but Cameron suddenly felt his legs fall to the ground, and within moments a pillow was quickly yet gently placed behind his head. The bruised and bloody face of Floof came into view. "Praise be!" Floof shouted between heavy breaths as he knelt down and grabbed Cameron by the shoulders. "You are awake!" "Yeah," Cameron said as he massaged his temples with his fingers. "And you're alive. I'm glad." "Yes, me too," Floof quickly replied. "I was worried about you, Cameron." "How did you survive?" Cameron asked as he sat up on the floor. "You were trapped, ambushed." "Ah, yes, I didn't want to die," Floof said. "Adequate motivation, no?" "It works," Cameron groaned as he pushed himself up off the floor. Floof joined him, and Cameron whistled when he got a good look at the man. "Man, you look rough," Cameron said. "I guess there was a pretty intense fight?" "I fell off a roof," Floof sighed. "I wish I had a better story, but alas, I am merely and simply stricken with the plague of clumsiness." Cameron snorted a laugh, and Floof smiled. "Have you seen the others?" Floof asked as Cameron rested his back and head against the wall. "No," Cameron answered. "I don't know how long I've been out. Last thing I remember was running to find them. I found Bernard." "Wonderful!" Floof cheered and gave Cameron a supportive pat on the back. "Let's go back to him and decide our next move from there. Do you know the way from here?" "I mean, it all looks the same to me," Cameron said as he looked around at the dark corridor he was in. "Can you take me back to where you found me?" "I can," Floof nodded. "Come, follow me." Floof deployed his ethereal shield, and it illuminated the area a little better. Cameron hummed and charged a fireball, adding to their light radius. They hurried down the corridor the way that they had come and stopped at an intersection. Floof looked left and right, and after analyzing the situation for a moment, he nodded and guided Cameron to the right. As they walked, Cameron could not help but reflect on his memories. His two most recent ones had really done a number on him. He felt a pit in his stomach, a burning as the anger inside him raged like a fire. He hated himself for how he had treated his family in his previous life. He hated that he had become just like his father, a violent and uncontrollable alcoholic. As he thought about it all, he couldn't help but groan with fury. Floof looked over at Cameron as he released the angry sound. "All is well, I hope?" He raised an eyebrow and wore a concerned expression. "Everything's fine," Cameron spat, ignorant as to how disturbed his tone of voice sounded. Floof squinted his eyes at the obviously lying Cameron, but decided against pursuing the topic any further. "Very well, friend," Floof said as he stopped at another dark intersection. "Here we are. You were lying just over there." He pointed to a spot on the floor, and Cameron nodded. "Okay, that's easy," he said in response. He nodded in the direction he remembered, and Floof joined him as they ran down the hallway. After only a moment, they found themselves back in the room that held Bernard. "Mr. Cameron!" Bernard called out. He sat up a little straighter, and Cameron's fireball illuminated his face. "I am glad to see you have returned." "Let's get you out of here," Cameron said as he turned to Floof. "This is Floof. He's a friend." "Hello, Floof," Bernard said tenderly. "I am glad to meet you." "And you, Bernard," Floof nodded. "I have heard so much about you." Cameron took hold of the shotgun that was slung around his back and held it in his hands. He walked up to Bernard and examined the chain. "I'm going to blast it," Cameron said. "Everyone get back." Cameron raised his shotgun and positioned the barrel right in front of the chain. Floof shielded himself and Bernard and nodded that it was safe. Cameron gritted his teeth and pulled the trigger, blasting the chain apart. He lowered his weapon and turned to Bernard. "You're free," he said with a smile. "Now come on. Let's find the others and get you out of here." "They are in the building," Bernard said. His eyes indicated he was looking at one of his menus. "I see them on the map. They are close. I have a crutch nearby. Hand it to me." Cameron looked around for a moment and found Bernard's wooden crutch. Floof helped him off the ground, and Cameron handed it over. "Scavenge what armor and items you can from these dead guys," Cameron said, pointing toward the men he had killed earlier. "Whatever they have—" "Oh no." His head suddenly felt light, and he staggered in place. "It's happening again." Floof rushed and took hold of Cameron's upper arm, just as his eyes rolled back into his head. Floof dragged him over to a wall and gently set him down as yet another memory surfaced. The rain fell harder than Cameron had ever seen it. Lightning danced in the dark Kansas sky, and thunder clapped almost endlessly. It was tornado weather, but Cameron didn't care. He squeezed the wheel of his truck with one hand and polished off another beer with the other. As he tossed the empty can into the passenger side floorboard, he fumbled in the seat for another drink. "Fuck you, Dad," Cameron hissed as he cracked another one open. He threw the beverage back, filling his throat with the amber substance. He needed the alcohol. He needed to forget that night. He took a moment to catch his breath as he had chugged half the beer and pulled onto the main street. "Fuck you, Sarah," Cameron shouted as his eyes filled with tears. Her betrayal was ripping his heart to shreds. The day he learned of it had been the first time in a long time that his emotional turmoil had actually pained him physically. He remembered thinking back to the death of his mother and how he hadn't eaten for a week. He remembered the abuse his father had put him through. Those feelings, he thought, had left him completely. After marrying Sarah, he thought his life would be perfect, and he would never know pain again. He was wrong. Cameron howled along with the tornado sirens as he flew down Main Street at over 60 miles per hour and climbing. Nobody was out. It was nearly 4 a.m. He was alone. He was angry, and he was hurt. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew that nothing could get in his way. Nothing could stop him. Not even the pulsing blue and red lights behind him. "Come on, boys! You can do better than that!" Cameron hung his head out the window and shouted. His face was pelted with the torrent of rain that fell, but he didn't care. He whooped and hollered as his speed hit 80 miles per hour. He flew past a stop sign and flipped it off, laughing maniacally as he pushed the gas a little harder. "This is my fucking life!" Cameron screamed as he threw back another drink of his beer. "I am in charge! I am—" A loud crash and the sound of metal scraping against metal filled his ears. Cameron lurched forward and his windshield exploded inward, showering his body with glass. He gasped and dropped his beer as he caught a glimpse of the vehicle he had blindsided flip and begin to roll down the road. He was okay. He threw his door open and jumped out, running toward the vehicle he had hit. It was a brand-new white Explorer, just like the one he had bought Sarah a few months earlier. His heart was in his stomach, his body bathed in the blue and red lights of the police cars behind him.
"Stop running!"
The police shouted over the bullhorn. Their cars were parked and they were chasing him on foot. "Please fucking no," Cameron whispered as he took off in a run. "Oh God, no!" Flames started forking from the corners of the hood just as Cameron ran to the driver's door. He tried to open it, but it was too badly damaged to budge. He pounded against the glass with his fist and pressed his face against the window to try and see inside. "No!" Cameron screamed. It was Sarah. Her eyes were closed and covered in blood. Cameron couldn't hear his girls crying in the backseat. He couldn't hear anything but the thunder and the tornado sirens. The police violently pulled him away, and one slammed him to the ground as the others quickly worked to get the Explorer open. Cameron screamed and kicked and fought to get back up, but could not make any headway against the officers. With a knee digging into his back, they cuffed him and sat him up. "That's my family!" Cameron screamed. "Let me get to them!" "You're a fucking piece of shit, Cameron." One of the officers was a man he had gone to school with. "You're worse than your dad! You just killed your family, you monster!" Cameron opened his eyes and blinked rapidly. For a moment, he just sat in the silence and darkness of the room and contemplated everything he had just seen. His thoughts were louder than Floof and Bernard's voices as they called out to him. Cameron could barely hear them. He whispered Sarah and Courtney's names and lowered his head. He didn't even know the names of his other children. It pained him, felt like nails were being driven through his entire body. Why was it all happening so fast and so frequently? Cameron's memories were rushing in more violently than the storm he had driven through when he had killed his family. He couldn't stop them. It was like he was supposed to know this stuff. Finally, Cameron could do nothing more than wipe his tears away and laugh.
Oh my!
Floof gritted his teeth and looked over at Bernard.
It appears that our friend may be losing it. Mr. Cameron!
Bernard grabbed Cameron's shoulders and shook him back to reality.
Please snap out of it. We need you here, my friend. Danger is coming.
Danger? Cameron reflected on the word. Of course danger was coming. Why wouldn't it be? They were on Happy Island after all. Cameron snickered again as he pushed himself up off the ground. A sort of haze seemed to envelop his senses as he stood. He felt numb and emotionless, like he wasn't a person anymore. Though it was just a memory, it felt as fresh and raw as if he really had just killed his entire family only moments ago.
Yes, danger, Bernard said. Out the window. We have company.
Cameron walked forward and raised one of the metal blinds that hung over the windows. He could see the compound from where he was. The sun had set and various street-light-looking structures had illuminated. In the light, he saw a bunch of trucks and people walking around and recognized one of them. He wore platinum armor with a horned helmet, and in his hands was a massive hammer. Cameron looked over at Floof and snorted. "Stephen," he whispered. "Slayers."
"Yes,"
Floof replied gravely.
"But they don't know we are here. I think all will be well."
Cameron!
Stephen suddenly shouted from below.
Come out and play, mate! We never finished our game!
Cameron turned to Floof and gave him a glare. Floof pursed his lips and nodded his head.
"One cannot always make correct statements," Floof said with a sheepish tone. "Anyway, he doesn't know where we are."
Stephen turned toward the window that Cameron was looking out of and pulled his helmet off. He flashed a smile and raised his hammer, pointing in their direction.
I see you!
Stephen yelled and belted a laugh.
"Well, fuck,"
Floof sighed. Cameron stared down at Stephen with a scowl, and Floof suddenly took hold of his upper arm.
"We need to go, Cameron," he said, his voice dripping with urgency. "We need to hide."